All right, you have been watching the Brendan Banfield murder trial here on WUSA 9+. We have been streaming that trial live for you. They began at 9:30 this morning. Here with me is Paul Kiyonaga. Thank you so much for being with me. He's an attorney here in the district, and he's going to be kind of weighing in, answering some questions for those of you at home. And those of you who do have questions, just a reminder, you can text us at 202-895-5599. We'd love to hear your questions, and he'll be able to hopefully give some perspective on some of the things that have been happening. And a lot has been happening today. We are on day 7 of this trial for Brendan Banfield. He's facing a number of charges. He's on trial for murder. Aggravated murder is one of the charges. He's facing 4 counts of aggravated murder, 1 count of using a firearm to commit a felony, 2 counts of child abuse with disregard for life, and 1 count of child cruelty. We've been hearing from a lot of witnesses the past few days. The defense has been taking their witnesses up to the stand since yesterday. Today, we heard from 6 witnesses so far. We expect to hear from more, but let's take you back to last week. We heard opening statements last Tuesday. I want to play you some of the highlights from opening statements last week. All right, so we're going to get you some of those highlights in a few moments if we're able to, and then get you some recap as well of some of the testimony that we heard. We heard from so many people last week. Paul, why don't we talk a little bit about what we really just saw in the last few moments? We were hearing from some of the detectives, some of the upper leaders of the Department for Fairfax County Police who were really involved with this case. We're talking about a case where 2 people were killed inside of a Fairfax County home. This was in February of 2023, February 24th. Juliana Peres Magalhães, she's arrested several months later in October of that year. So October of 2023 is when Juliana's arrested, charged with murder. It's not for another year, September of 2024, that Brendan Banfield, Christine Banfield's husband, is arrested and charged as well. And then a month later is when we see Juliana take that plea agreement. A lot of the conversation there today was about that timeline. Brendan being arrested in September, Juliana being arrested or taking the plea deal in October. Your initial thoughts when you're listening to this coming on?
Well, interestingly today, a lot of the focus is on the investigation that was done by the police. Mm-hmm. And it appears that what the defense attorney is trying to do is what most defense attorneys in this sort of situation would do, which is cast doubt on the integrity, thoroughness mm-hmm. of the police investigation. So this morning, for example, we heard testimony from Leah Smith, who is a detective. And at one point she used the phrase that she felt she was being essentially pushed to adopt a certain narrative that her supervisors were pushing, mm-hmm. that she had to get behind the narrative. This, for a defense attorney, is very important. Right. We remember from the OJ days when they said that there was a rush to judgment. Mm-hmm. Well, in this case, there would be kind of a rush to a foregone or a theory that was favored, okay? Mm-hmm. So that is kind of the theory. And I remember hearing that Carol, the defense attorney, at one point had termed this case one of a theory in search of evidence, right? So the more that he can do to build up the idea that the investigation was not thorough, that the investigation was biased, and that it had a predetermined, pushed outcome, the more he's able to cast doubt on whether or not this prosecution case mm-hmm. is viable, whether or not it meets that high standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Right. So that appears to be what he's doing today. He's getting witnesses who are police officials mm-hmm. or former police officials. Right. And he's asking them all sorts of questions about, well, did you feel pressured in trying to reach certain conclusions? Did you pressure people to reach certain conclusions? Did you try, in other words, to have the evidence that had been marshaled match the theory you wanted? All of which is being used to suggest that this is not the sort of solid investigation upon which a conviction can be built. Yeah, just trying to poke those little holes in the case, just cause any sort of reasonable doubt. And I've represented a lot of cases, had a lot of clients. Have you ever represented a case that was similar to this one? Not similar. I mean, look, what case, this is so sordid on every level, regardless of whatever theory one wants to adopt. It is a tragic, awful circumstance involving the presence of a 4-year-old in the home.
Right.
So have I handled homicide cases? Yes. Have I handled cases involving sex abuse or sex assault? Yes. Have I handled one involving this sort of contorted catfish situation? No, this is not your typical case.
Yeah, it's very complex. Paul, I do want to, if we can, share with our viewers, again, the opening statements, some of the highlights from that. And I do want to preface by saying we saw these opening statements. They lasted less than 40 minutes, which was a surprise for me to see them move so quickly. So let's take a listen to that if we can.
It's the Commonwealth versus Brendan Banfield. Mr. Banfield is present in the courtroom with his attorney, and the Commonwealth is present.
We're here today because Brendan Banfield, the man seated behind me, killed his wife, Christine Banfield, and another man named Joseph Ryan.
The murder of Christine Banfield by Joe Ryan occurred on February 24th, 2023.
They sneak up the stairs to the bedroom where they hear Joe Ryan and Christine. Brendan enters the bedroom first, shooting Joe in the head, picks up the knife that Joe had brought, and stabs Christine repeatedly in the neck. He directs Juliana to shoot Joe a second time with her gun. Brendan spends the next several minutes manipulating Joe Ryan's body, in the process leaving Christine's blood on Joe's hands and pants.
The arrest of Juliana Peres Magalhães took place in October of 2023. And the whole reason she was arrested was to flip her against my client. You won't hear any dispute as to the relationship between Brendan Banfield and Juliana Peres Magalhães. But there's an awful lot more to look for, ladies and
The
gentlemen.
blood puts Brendan Banfield standing over Christine, stabbing her in the neck until she died. While Juliana presents us with the narrative, it is the blood evidence that you can rely upon without a doubt.
Digital forensics doesn't lie. People lie. And there are going to be plenty to see.
And since those opening statements, you know, we've already seen the prosecution close their case. We've seen them present all of the evidence that they're mentioning there, a lot of that blood splatter evidence that they provided an analyst to come in and talk about the blood splatter. And, you know, since John Carroll has taken over and he's been calling his witnesses, we've started to see some of him, what he talked about, you know, that forensics.
Correct.
He talked about how the forensics don't lie, people don't lie, and we've really seen him kind of pushing that forward. Your reaction to just those opening statements?
I think the opening statements, it's not atypical for the government to present what the evidence will show in some degree of specificity. They want to tell the story. They want the jury to be on their side from the jump. It is also not unusual for the defense to be a little more guarded, a little more open, and a little more, let's see how things go. Because if you stake out something in a defense opening that you cannot support with the evidence that follows, then the jury is going to look at this and say, what have you been trying to sell us?
Right.
So I think it's not unusual that the defense opening was a little more, hey, there are a lot of questions here. There are a lot of things we need to look at. There are a lot of things that aren't going to make sense to you, jurors. So keep an open mind and let's see what those are. Because bear in mind again, that the job of the defense is not necessarily to present an alternate theory to the government's theory. It's not to educate the jury on what actually happened here necessarily. Their first job is to show that the government's theory in the end does not hold water and is not enough to lead to a conviction. So that's how it's positioned strategically, typically. And what we saw is that, you know, the government is trying to present as much evidence as possible that this was a catfishing, that this was a deliberate attempt between Juliana and Brendan to manufacture this very scenario of a fetish rape fantasy that then led to the ability to create what happened, namely the death of two people. Because after all, according to the government, the whole reason why this was done was because Juliana and Brendan had an affair and wanted to get rid of Christine. And divorce was not evidently the option, because divorce would have potentially meant that Brendan could not have custody of the 4-year-old daughter. So it's a leap, I would say. I mean, that's an extreme idea that you're going to physically end someone's life for those reasons rather than other alternatives. But that is the theory.
Right.
And so that's where we go from there, is in trying on the defense side to poke holes in it.
All right, thank you for that perspective, Paul. You know, Paul's going to be taking our questions here in a moment. The number to text, again, if we could put it up there on the screen, is 202-895-5599. So if you're watching this live with us, we would love to hear your questions. We do have some questions already lined up for you, Paul, but you know, the more questions, the merrier. I know this is a very complicated, complex case, so we want to make sure we can clarify as many things and many questions you might have as well as we can. It does look like we do have Matthew Torres, who has been in the courtroom for us all morning long. He's been in there for all 6 of these witnesses. If we can bring Matthew in, we'd love to get his perspective on kind of the reaction as we're seeing these law enforcement officers being called to the stand. Matthew, what has been the reaction from the jurors? What's on their faces when you're looking at them?
You know, they've been paying attention. There was one point, especially in the beginning there, when they were showing video that we were not able to hear, so we don't know exactly what was being shown. We know it was a bit of an interaction with an officer and Juliana Magalhães in the police cruiser there. They were watching the whole time. There was one point one juror kind of glanced away and then looked at us. So that was a lengthy video, almost 30 minutes long. Outside of that, though, it's been a lot of questions when it comes to these detectives. Keep in mind, these are detectives who we have not seen being called on by the Commonwealth. And so what was interesting as well was just before they let go of Captain Bruce, who was the one involved with the transfer of the forensic investigator, Brendan Miller, you saw Brendan Banfield really working with John Carroll. You could just tell how involved he is, at least with the follow-up questions to redirect. And then ultimately is the reason why John Carroll asked Captain Bruce about the hierarchy, the structure of the command system, and you know who homicide detectives direct themselves to. And so as far as that, no specific major emotions really coming from the courtroom. I'm very intrigued to see what other exhibits will be shown by the defense. We're already seeing those text messages sent by Lieutenant Gyasho to Captain Bruce, the ones who reportedly were pushing this catfish theory, according to the defense. And so whether that is sticking, we understand what they are arguing about, but the idea of as far as how much this came into play, the theory versus waiting for all of the evidence. And I thought what was interesting regarding the line of questioning from John Carroll from Gyasho there at the very end, asking him whether or not he pushed for this catfish theory. He's saying that yes, he believed this is what was that was the case. And ultimately, he also said that they pretty much waited until they got all the evidence and the proffer from Juliana Magalhães, which is that statement she made to police, before they came to the conclusion as far as charging Brendan Banfield in this case. And so, as well as the homicide detective from earlier, the back and forth there as far as whether or not she felt pressured to pursue the catfish theory. I think they're really trying to show that they collected all of the evidence before truly charging Brendan Banfield, but this is where the defense is really now poking holes in the prosecution's theory and case ultimately. So as far as reaction, Katie, I know this is what you asked earlier, really no big reaction, as we're really now going to text by text message the correspondence between the people with command staff and the Major Crimes Bureau.
Yeah, and Matthew, you know, we've heard from a lot of the upper leaders of the Fairfax County Police Department. I know you and I have interacted with a lot of the officers who were up there on the stand. I know one of the questions Annie and I were having or discussing earlier is, do we think Chief Kevin Davis is going to be called to the stand? Obviously, we're hearing some of these names being mentioned. Director Fayez, you know, Chief Davis. Have you seen him there? Do you think he's going to be one of the people called by the defense?
That's what I'm also wondering, because as soon as they mentioned one of the text messages being with Chief Kevin Davis, our ears perked because now we want to know what those text messages said, exactly how much influence potentially Chief Davis had when it comes to this investigation. You heard from one of the investigators there that typically when it comes to supervisors, they're not the ones actually investigating the cases. As far as Director Fayez, I have not seen her at all. I've certainly interviewed her in past stories as being the victim services director there. Her name was part of the subpoena list. So potentially she could be called on to testify. Just being out in the hallways, though, I do notice two other investigators. So presumably they might be called on first before Director Fayez, and whether or not Chief Davis testifies, that is something that clearly we are also paying attention to.
Yeah, Matthew, you mentioned that body camera footage that was shared with the, you know, everyone in there earlier that was played quietly. You couldn't hear the audio from that. We were not able to get kind of a clear idea of why the judge ruled that it would be played without audio. Did you seem to get an understanding of why that choice was made?
No, so interesting that you heard a little bit of audio. We did not hear anything at all, aside from the couple of questions that John Carroll asked this particular officer. We are not particularly sure. We're thinking because there might be the presence of Christine and Brendan's 4-year-old child at some point during that. But again, they wouldn't have shown the video anyway, so not being able to hear the audio, that was interesting, a good question. Certainly I'll try to ask actually, you know, Jenna Sands or John Carroll when we see them entering the courtroom. I do also want to mention one of the text messages mentioned Eric Klingen, one of the Commonwealth attorneys there at the time, mentioning how, you know, his case may not be as strong, the concerns about the preliminary hearing. He was actually in the courtroom. He's been in the courtroom the whole time, except maybe the past 2 days actually, but he was back in the courtroom today. So for us to kind of turn our heads to see his reaction, he didn't give much. He certainly was paying clear attention to what they were saying about him, but knowing that he was in the courtroom, especially that he was mentioned in these texts, were also interesting.
Yeah, and Matthew, I know you and I were discussing yesterday, he's no longer a part of this case, correct?